Well, g'day Exponential Australia. Thanks for joining us again today as we're engaging with lots of church leaders from right across our nation, particularly with a heart for multiplication and church planting. And today we are joined by David O'Connor, or Doc O'Connor, as he's affectionately known as. Doc, along with his wife Amity, lead a great church in Sydney's northwest called New Hope, which is a Baptist church. And they are currently also planting another church in an area called Box Hill, which is a growth corridor in the northwest of Sydney, and I'll let him tell us more about that. But Doc, thanks so much for being with us today.
No worries, Charlie. Thanks for having me, mate.
Absolute pleasure. We've been friends for some time. I wonder if you just start off today by just telling us a bit of who you are, your background, where you've been in ministry, your family, what's led you to 2022.
Yeah, sure. Well, my name's Doc. Nice to meet everyone. Hope this conversation today blesses you and encourages you. I've been in ministry since I was 19, full-time vocational ministry. So that's 21, 22 years now.
It'd be like 3 years, mate.
Sorry?
I thought it'd be like 3 years. You're a young spunk.
No, I've lost all my hair through the ministry journey, and we've got Amity, my wife, and I. We've been married since 2002. We've got 4 kids. We're teaching our eldest to drive at the moment, which is, I think, probably a harder experience than church planting and church leadership. But we're just incredibly blessed to be part of New Hope up in Kellyville, and also planted last year into Box Hill, which, as you mentioned, Charlie, is a huge growth corridor in the northwest of Sydney. And I think we've just got the best group of people who are part of our church in the world. They're kind, loving, supportive, full of faith, united and joyful. And yeah, we're just surrounded by wonderful people. And it just seems to us that the Lord has really orchestrated the seasons and circumstances and the journey of our lives to this point, and that He's opening some pretty amazing doors for New Hope and for our people and for us as the servant leaders of the church to be able to walk by faith through. And yeah, man, it's just a great time to be alive. I'm a Raiders fan. I'm a mad golfer. So if anyone ever wants a game of golf, hit me up, because I'm always up for it. And just love being with people. So that's me in a nutshell, mate.
Awesome. And so you're you're a newly converted Baptist. You haven't always been a Baptist. You've been in Pentecostal circles. You've had great exposure to all parts of the church. Why don't you tell us a little bit about New Hope and the church that you do lead, and then maybe we can talk about why did it get to a point where, as a local church, you went, we feel like the Lord is calling us to plant a church. And not just one church, and we'll talk about that a bit more later, but you guys have also got a pretty incredible vision to plant several churches even this year.
Yeah, so that's cool. We came on as lead pastors at New Hope 4.5 years ago. A good Sunday, I think we would have had about 45 people, including the kids. So once the kids went out to kids ministry, there was about maybe 20 people left in the hall to encourage around God's word and whatnot. And when we started, we just felt like the most important thing was to create an environment and a place where people genuinely love Jesus, where people open their lives to one another. Faith as community is a big value for us and for our church. And we sort of had this attitude and mindset and motto of one by one. So as people came to the church, we would really welcome them, we would really love them, and we would help them to connect to other people, and hopefully have created an environment where their kids and young people would be served really well and championed along in our faith. That's another one of our core values, seeing the next generations champion, but also a place where they could really fix their eyes on Jesus and sing about Him, hear about Him, tell others about Him. And so there's nothing particularly innovative or creative about New Hope. We try to keep things relatively simple and focused on the main things. But yeah, that one-by-one mentality has really served us well, because we've had that value for the one. And I guess as the journey of church leadership and life goes on for people, you do see people drift to the fringes. And so we've sort of taken the Lord's word seriously, that there need to be times where you do leave the 99 to go after the one. So we don't give up easily on people. And if people are on the way out, we really try to encourage them to land somewhere else and help them to find where their next church community or church family might be. And I think for us, that's been the huge key, has just been that emphasis on next generations, that emphasis on keeping Jesus at the center, and that emphasis of one by one, valuing people as they come. And so sort of 4.5 years on, we've been fortunate enough to be able to plant a second congregation into Box Hill. And yeah, I guess if everybody showed up on any given Sunday to our 2 congregations now, you'd be looking at just over 350 people across those 2 congregations, really healthy generations. We've got, great young adult community, a great high school community, a great primary age community, and heaps of kids coming through who are year 2 or under. So yeah, we've got this just really neat church that God has really blessed and put his hand upon, and people feel comfortable and passionate about being a part of and committed to. So it's just been an exciting 4.5 years.
So good, Doc. And I think one of the things I've always loved and appreciated about you and your ministry is that while you're obviously very passionate about the people that God has given you spiritual care over, you're also a strategist. You're thinking about what's next, and not to your own detriment, but you are trying to work out how can we extend the kingdom? How can we be faithful with what is given us? And so a great example of that being last year, where you went about planting a church in the middle of a pandemic, which a lot of churches would kind of be pulling back the reins at that point in time, but you were actually going, and not even just for one central location, you're going, how can we plant another community in an area that needs a new vibrant church that's going to engage families, singles, the whole gamut of people. Just tell us about last year and what that looked like as you look to do that out of a church that had been around for almost a decade. It was still a young-ish church, but you'd seeded that idea of church planting in its DNA from the get-go.
Yeah, sure. So when it came to Box Hill, one of the advantages was it's 15 minutes up the road from Kellyville. So I guess it had been an area that we'd earmarked for a little while and spoken about as a leadership team, and seeded the idea with the church for a little while prior to 2020. 2020, we obviously all know the global pandemic hit, and so the plan was to plan into 2020. But we used that year, instead of just continuing to gather interest and gather people and connect people to one another and the vision of what we wanted to do at Box Hill, that involved a lot of online information nights, the odd prayer night when we could get together through 2020. And that was good, because I think it put it on the slow burn a little bit. But how we always presented to our folks at New Hope was, when we planted Box Hill, what we were simply doing was taking who we were already at Kellyville and being that in a new neighborhood and in a new community. So I think it really took a lot of that daunting nature of church planting out of the atmosphere for us, and that who we were, we would simply replicate that somewhere else, and we believed that God's hand was going to be upon that, and that we were going to be able to achieve that. So we just had the slow burn through 2020, gathering people. Then 2021, at the start of 2021, if you can think back and remember, I think everyone had this hope and confidence in their heart that the worst was behind us and that there was going to be some clean air. No pun intended there at all, to be able to plant the church and get going with being a local church in that area, and gather and have ministry and outreach to the community. And so we got going in February last year, and then 2021 turned out to be just as unpredictable and tumultuous as 2020 was, perhaps if not more, given that we had this natural sense of hope, and that hope was dashed. And so there are a bunch of different things that caused 2021 to be challenging. However, one of the things we spoke about as something that we needed to embed into the church at Box Hill was perseverance.
Yeah.
And that we were going to be in a battle, we were going to be in a spiritual battle. And so we needed a spirit of perseverance. And so the church really just was united around the idea that we just got to go with the flow here, and we're playing the long game. We're looking to establish a local church for this community, not just for today, but until the Lord returns.
Wow.
And so the church has really been perseverant through it. It hasn't been without challenge, obviously. Some of that isolation and not being able to gather physically has meant some of those relationships haven't quite embedded as deeply as what we would have liked them to. But we're committed to moving forward this year and meeting fortnightly on a Sunday, and we've created some structure within the community where there are clusters of 10 to a dozen households that we call tribes that care for one another, encourage one another, where those friendships can go a little bit deeper. And we're doing a bit of leadership training and support for those tribal leaders. So the structure is in place there, and the people's hearts are still willing and joyful. And God's been really, really gracious, because we've been able to go one by one and continue to add one by one as we've gone through 2021 and into early 2022. And I think having a great youth ministry where our young people and young adults from Box Hill and Kellyville can come and meet, that's been a really key thing, because our grace zone is families and reaching families. Right. And particularly reaching families who have disengaged with their faith, or adults who have grown up in the faith but walked away from their faith, and now as parents and as married people are recognizing the need to put Jesus in the center of their lives. And so that's our grace zone, and we see a lot of people re-engaging with their faith at New Hope, which is, it's an awesome privilege to be able to serve those people and help them build strong marriages, strong families, and be great parents and see those next generations come through.
So good, Doc. And I guess one of the questions I'd have for you, just as I'm hearing all those amazing stories and what the Lord has been doing, plenty, and again, this isn't a criticism at all, plenty of churches may sit back and go, awesome, we've planted a church, Yet you are this leader who has this vision to go, okay, now we're going to do our third. Now we're going to do our fourth. And that requires some serious paradigm shifting within your own mind, but also in the way that you lead your eldership or your board or whatever governance structure a church may have. What have you kind of, I guess, employed in trying in the life of New Hope to talk about? It's not just about, and of course we want to see vibrant congregations gather together, but it's not just about one location. It's not just about growing one necessarily central or larger churches. Actually, we want to see different parts of the area that God has placed you in affected for the kingdom of God. How have you gone about that kind of process, journey, strategy?
There's an extent to which I don't really know how to answer that question, because
it's probably the beauty of it then.
I think what's in you comes out of you. And I live in northwest Sydney, so it's a huge growth area, and not only in the Hills district here, but into the Hawkesbury and into Blacktown. And as you go further south, there's just this massive growth corridor that's extending throughout northwest and southwest and greater Western Sydney. So, I've always sort of had it on my heart to plant churches, because I just believe that great churches in local communities reach people and reach families. And that's how you see discipleship and evangelism taking place, is primarily through that vehicle or establishment of healthy local churches. So it's sort of just been in us. And I think as we've communicated to our church at Kellyville, we could be who we are in other places too. I think it's just made good sense to people. And I think I've got a little bit of ADD, and you talk about living in the future. Probably I do that a little bit too much rather than being in the present. But I think if you just got that sense of urgency that, today's more important than yesterday. And tomorrow's going to be more important still, because we approach nearer and nearer to the day when the Lord returns and gathers his people to himself. I really do think we need to live with an urgency, and that's not to be stupid, but it is to recognize, I've got this sort of this idea or conviction that wisdom can sometimes be the excuse for a lack of faith.
Yeah.
And we go, we've got to be wise. We've got to do the wise thing, and that can lead to an overly cautious approach.
Yeah.
But I actually think we need to operate in faith with wisdom.
Wow.
And that's not to be reckless. We do need to do our due diligence, but sometimes I think we set benchmarks of where we need to be in terms of number, where we need to be financially, or we need to, traditionally churches might wait for someone to come and knock on the door and say, I want to plant a church, or I feel called to plant a church, before you even start thinking about it. We sort of have the opposite approach in that our posture and our intention is to plant more churches. And so we identify areas, we make provision for that within our budget, we receive offerings, and we hit up other people to be able to support these churches. And then we go and look for the right people to plant these churches. And so it's a little bit of an opposite approach, but there's an intentionality and a faith to it. And I just think we need to keep going again and again and again as the Lord, reveals to us these areas you could go to, or these areas I'm calling you to. And I think the ones that sort of fit our eye spiritually and that God gives us a prompting to, they're the areas that we get drawn to, and we, look to be intentional around that.
So good, Doc. It feels like in some way you're reverse engineering it. Like you're really, I can see your heart as an evangelist, and you're trying to go, we want to plant churches because we know that's going to reach people. So therefore our strategy is going to work backwards from there in terms of how we make that happen. And that's just a really fascinating insight. Doc, we've just got a couple of minutes left. I want to throw quick out.
I don't think the Lord's come.
Go for it, mate.
Yeah. I don't think the Lord's coming back for a bank account or a group of people that buried their talents in the ground. At the end of the day, we've sort of got to use what God's given us to multiply out. And so that when he comes back, I know we've all heard that parable before, but when he comes back, he'll say, well done, good and faithful servant. And I just think for us, that looks like raising, championing the generations. And our vision, if you wanted to hear it in a nutshell, Charlie, is, to plant small churches that we support to become established neighborhood churches over a 3 to 5 year period. That's what we want to do.
Yeah.
That's our elevator pitch. That's our be all. That's our, that's what we're about. And so, we just look, we've got the vision. So then when you've got a vision, the next question obviously becomes, how do you do that?
Yes.
And you've got to find a way forward in that vision. And it doesn't have to be a perfect plan. You don't have to get bogged down in detail or theory or research, or you've just got to have a faith to believe that God's called you, that the plan has enough common sense and wisdom in it that it's got a good chance of working, and you can amend the plan as you go. You can make the adjustments as you go. So it's, I just think we've got to keep going.
Absolutely, Doc. That's fantastic. Hey, like I was about to say before, just a couple of quick barrage of questions to finish up our time. Firstly, some of your key influences when it comes to planting and ministry. Who have you looked to? Great sources of encouragement for you.
Yeah. I really love what the ARC guys do. I really love their intentionality and investment into church planting. So their model, their process, while we don't use it in its entirety, has helped to, I guess, it's spoken to our approach. And I've been fortunate. One of my good friends is Paul Andrew, who went to New York to plant Liberty Church and has planted other communities, not only in New York, but also around the world. And so I've just had a good friend who's planted a great church, and been able to draw a bit of inspiration from him as well. I'd say they'd be the main influences.
Right, mate. It's not just the manuals or the textbooks, it's the people as well.
I don't really have any manuals or textbooks, Charlie.
Greatest joys and greatest challenges in planting. I know that's a big question, but
the greatest joys are easy. It's the people. It's meeting new people. It's seeing a person who's moved into an area, who have no connections, who perhaps have a faith or a little faith or disengage with their faith, finding out or coming into contact with another person or the church and re-engaging. That's the greatest joy. It's just seeing people and families and households won back into the kingdom. So that's a really, really easy question. And I guess the idea that, hey, we're establishing church communities that are going to be there until the Lord returns. There's an element of satisfaction that comes with that as well. The greatest challenges, man, I think it's leadership. I think it's finding leaders. I think it's raising up leaders. And to steal that title of that book, it's the leadership pipeline of church planting and church leadership, and people who have those broad shoulders to be able to carry the weight of leading a church and pastoring a church. So I think that's the biggest challenge that we have. Is it's not a lack of resources. It's finding the leaders and the right people.
Yeah, it's great, Doc. And I guess what would be our last question, but it's a bit of a twofold question. Firstly, what is one thing that you would say to the potential church planter? Like, what is the thing that sits as a great retrospective learning that you've had in being part of planting that you would say to a church planter? Yeah. And I guess second to that, what would you say to the Aussie church, to the church that is maybe kind of sitting there going, I wonder if we could plant, I wonder if that's in us as a church, by way of encouragement to them in this season? Sure.
What would I say to the person thinking about church planting or whatever? I'd say, work your faith muscle. I'd say build your faith muscle. That's the most important quality and commodity that you are going to need in your life is faith. And so I would say the only way to build the faith muscle is be in the faith gym, which is exercising your faith regularly. So I would say you have to be a radical giver. You have to be somebody that really digs deep in their own relationship with God. You've got to cultivate a boldness and a courage when it comes to the way you live out your own faith. And good ideas don't, for me anyway, create great churches. Yes. It's people that know how to reach and connect with other people and help them to form the connections and be encouraged in faith. That's what builds a great church. And so I think you can't go into church planning if you don't know what it is to gather people, reach people, witness to people, lead people to faith, connect people into community, go the extra mile, give generously and radically. If you don't have a strong faith muscle, you're really setting yourself up for a learning curve. And on many occasions we've seen this, that learning curve might involve a failure, and a launch and a crash. And that's not to say you should never plant a church again after that, but you need faith. You can't do anything. You can't please God without faith, and you can't achieve anything. You can't see mountains moved without faith. So that's the thing I'd say to church planters. I think it's just my own opinion, but I think we put way too much emphasis on education and not enough emphasis on just street smarts and revelation and experience. Wow. So that's what I'd say to church planters. What I'd say to the Aussie church is we can do it. We don't need what we think we need to be able to go again and multiply out. If you have the intention and the passion to do it, to plant another church, then begin to find the way to make that happen and to do that. And so I just think we play way too safe. what's that verse? I think it's in Ecclesiastes, where it says, if you look at the clouds before sowing your seed, you're never going to do it, basically.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think we're guilty of that from time to time. We just want all 10 ducks lined up in a row before we would even think about planting a church. Every local church is going to have conflict, challenges, issues to juggle, resources to manage, books to balance, all that sort of stuff. But if we wait until conditions are perfect, we end up becoming like that person who dug their talent in the ground and think that just holding out, it just brings God any pleasure. And I think we need to be expansive in our faith and in our vision and capacity, and kind of like the widow bringing the jars to Elijah. You just got to keep presenting capacity to the Lord, don't you? So the more we can empty out, the more God can fill us.
Yeah, it's great.
So we've got to just flip some of this economy of thinking and some of our posture on its head if we're going to really keep going and plant more churches.
That's awesome, Doc. I'm so encouraged and inspired by some of the things that you've had to share with us today. So I really, really appreciate your time. And as you said right at the beginning, I hope this blesses many as they hear some of the journey of New Hope.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me.